Hello, my name is Katie Groves, and this is part 14 in my series about deprogramming from trauma-based mind control. If you've not done so already, I ask that you please watch the first 2 videos in this series, linked in the description below, for disclaimers and safety measures you can take while you watch these videos. This video is about mindful eating. It can be triggering for some people, including myself, and I'm not sure I'm going to do the best job making this video, but I will do my best, and I hope that it does help people. So what is mindful eating? Well, like any other mindfulness practice, it is simply consciously, deliberately paying attention to one's experience of food. Now, mindfulness can be difficult for anyone who's been mind controlled, because mind control, its very essence, is dissociative. It keeps people unaware, disconnected. So to reconnect and to become aware of things that were forcibly dissociated from a person's consciousness can be very traumatizing and difficult. None of this is easy, and food can contain a lot of core trauma for people within ritual abuse cults who do really horrible practices involving forced feeding of things that should not ever be probably eaten by people. And so having endured this myself, I know how hard it can be to bring the experience of food, even just the subject of food, into consciousness. But it is something that I have had to do. One of the primary things I've had to do in deprogramming myself has been learning to make my own food and to take care of myself physically. I was kept very dependent upon the cult, upon my family, for my food consumption and preparation. And had I not been, I might have broken free sooner. So that's a big way in which people sometimes are kept controlled. So when I first started healing, I found that I was very unmindful of my eating, that I would go into programs that forced me to eat very quickly, forced me to eat foods that I didn't want to eat, foods designated by my abusers that were there to activate programming. And so one of the first things I did was I made a list of foods that I can and cannot eat. It was a mental list, but I did do plenty of journaling around food. And I charted which foods activated programs and which foods were more neutral. And that really helped me tremendously. I, of course, needed my dissociative parts to help me do this, and so I had to approach each individual part as part of the deprogramming process and ask them for help in this and tell them what I was trying to do. And the ones who were awake enough already to join me in this, or who I was able to deprogram from deep unconsciousness, I was able to use to assist me in eating more mindfully. So I've done a lot of integration, a lot of self-discovery about my programming around food, and first and foremost, what foods I choose. So I found some foods that weren't so triggering, and I started trying to make them. I found that beef was too triggering, red meat was not good, it triggered a lot of trauma. I found that chicken was pretty safe, but pork was not, so I started eating a lot of chicken. But I found that very quickly my trauma was too debilitating for me to cook. I had not been allowed to cook in my host selves. I'm bringing the programmed parts into consciousness that were allowed to cook, flooded me with trauma and made it impossible to use the stove or an oven safely. So I found that I had to eat a lot of frozen food, and that took a lot of acceptance for me. I really wanted to do it all myself and all right away, but I had to do this very slowly over time. And it's only been in the last couple of weeks that I've actually been able to start cooking my own food. I can use an oven now, I can even use stoves. There's some things like eggs that I'm still too triggered to make for my programming, but I've been able to make pasta dishes and chicken and actually be creative, and it's been wonderful. So anyways, what I was trying to say was that I found for most of the time I've been healing that I was unable to cook normally, and so I had to buy frozen foods. And so because I wanted to take this seriously and I wanted to eat mindfully and healthily, I started buying more organic foods. I found a really great grocery store out in the area I relocated to that was by far the best grocery store I'd ever seen that had really healthy, really awesome frozen meals. And so I started preparing those, and I found that I could let go of the need to cook, and with my frozen foods, focus on other aspects of mindfulness until I was ready to cook. And that involved becoming aware of chewing, of tasting, and of enjoying my food. Now, food for me before was at best an unconscious process and at worst a highly traumatic process. The idea of enjoying my food was pretty foreign. And as a child, the few times I had quote-unquote positive food experiences, I was being bribed at fancy restaurants by my parents, by handlers, as a means of keeping my programming intact. Children who grow up in the aristocracy, like myself, children who are programmed to be entitled and to rely on wealth and extravagance, are groomed oftentimes by being taken out to fancy restaurants, to movies, on vacations. They're treated like, wealthy children. And so even though at home there's a lot of deprivation, and in the cult there was a lot of starvation and abuse and neglect, I was still at times taken out on these fancy restaurants. And at those times I was allowed, not forced, to quote unquote enjoy the food. But again, it was a bribe, and it was part of my programming to encourage me to stay and to keep my mouth shut. And so I found that the concept of enjoying food, it made me feel dirty, it made me feel sick, it made me feel like I was being used. It brought back those feelings from the grooming. So learning how to reclaim food and work through my trauma around all of that has been very difficult. But I've found that the foods that I like are often different from the foods that I was programmed to eat, and that I can, by becoming mindful, I can put my own spiritual stamp on what I eat. That when I cook it myself, it is mine. And at the same time, I can have reverence and respect for the fact that food is a gift from this universe of which we are all a part. I can cherish in abundance. I'm poor, but I live on food stamps, and I can give thanks for that. So I've learned to be grateful and have a really deep sense of gratitude around the fact that I can now consciously eat and consciously experience food in a way that I was never able to before. So now that I'm able to cook for myself, I'm able to really experience the power of choice and get creative. And I'm able to do things with food that I was never allowed to do before. And I really can't express my deepest gratitude for what that means to me. Because being able to make my own food is freedom. Like I said, it was a way of keeping me dependent upon my abusers, that I was not able to prepare my own food. So overcoming my trauma enough to use stoves and ovens and actually choose what to eat is just astounding. And eventually, one of my big life goals is to have my own farm, to have a garden in which I can grow my own food, vegetables, and supply a community with fresh, organic food products. And that feels more and more possible every day. It'll be decades probably before I do it, but the mindfulness, right, is the seed. The conscious awareness is the seed out of which love can grow. And so by watering that seed through simply making my meals, sharing them with others, and enjoying my food experiences, I could do a lot with it in the future. Okay, that's all for this video. Thank you.